We now have all of our matchups in place for the second round of the Eastern Conference Stanley Cup playoffs. In this video, we're going to do a preview and prediction for who we think is going to win each series. And that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, we're all ready to roll here for round 2 of the Eastern Conference NHL playoffs this year. The matchups are finally all set now that the Bruins and Leafs wrapped up their Game 7 last night. So we've got the Bruins versus the Lightning, and we've got the Penguins versus the Capitals, yet again. So now we're going to take a look at each series. I'll give you my thoughts on each team and tell you who I think is going to win in this round of the playoffs. So let's get started here with Boston and Tampa Bay. So obviously this is a case of the top 2 teams in the Atlantic Division this year battling it out. The Lightning beat out the Devils in 5 games, where the Bruins just come through a hard-fought 7-game series against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So obviously the Lightning have had more rest than the Bruins. That may come into favor. Obviously they may come through a little healthier. Although the Bruins don't seem to be doing too bad for injuries. Now, first of all, I know that the season series sometimes doesn't play a big role in how the playoffs go. The playoffs are a whole different beast. But at this point, until the series gets going, we don't have a whole lot to go by. So we can only go by the past history when these two teams have hooked up. So let's take a look at their season series and see how it's gone this current season. They played back in November, and then the other 3 times that they played came really late in the year. They had 3 games between middle of March and April. So let's take a look at the results here. Back November the 29th, we had a 3-2 Bruins victory. That game was in Boston. In March the 17th, we had a 3-0 Bruins victory. That game was in Tampa. March the 29th, we had a 4-2 Bruins victory. That game was also in Boston. And then their final meeting of the year came on April the 3rd. With the division pretty much on the line, with Tampa taking a 4-0 victory at home in Tampa Bay. So obviously this is a case where the Bruins won 3-1 this year. Tampa only won that final meeting, but for the most part you could say the Bruins dominated Tampa this year, and they certainly had their number. So we have to keep that in mind. Now if you take a look at the playoffs so far and how each team has performed, obviously like I said, they both won their first round matchup, so they're playing relatively well. The Lightning are 5 for 19 on their power play, where Boston is 7 for 21. So that gives Boston an edge with a higher percentage, but they're both clicking at a pretty good rate. They both have a lot of tremendous players they can put out on their power play. You know, with Boston, you could put Bergeron, Marchand, Pasternak, Krug, McAvoy, Chara, etc. Whereas on the Lightning side, you've got Kucherov, Stamkos. You've got Victor Hedman on the back end. They have some powerful players on both sides of the ice that can put a lot of pucks in the net. So I think a key for either team to be successful here is to be disciplined and not give your opponent too many opportunities. So far in these playoffs, though, I think Tuukka Rask had his moments in the first round against Toronto where he played well early on. But really that middle part to the end of the series, he did not look the greatest. And even last night, they pull off a 7-4 victory. But I'm sure he wasn't pleased with his performance, and he probably thanked his teammates a lot for bailing him out and getting the scapegoat off his back, because really, he did not play the greatest. He looked to let in some goals that he definitely should have had. So goaltending, for me, for the Bruins, is a question mark. Tuukka Rask needs to bounce back and really come through, whereas Andrei Vasilevskiy really looked focused, engaged, and dialed in that series against the Devils, and he had a tremendous, much stronger performance, in my opinion, than Rask did in the first round. Not to say that Tuukka Rask can't keep up, though. Obviously, Rask is a tremendous goaltender, and we'll see if he can get his game in order here for round 2. I mean, if you take a look, they both have a lot of offensive power. You get the Bruins top line, but even the Bruins beyond the first line, they have a lot of secondary scoring. Krejci, DeBrusk, just to name a couple guys there. Like Jake DeBrusk had a tremendous first round series. In Tampa, besides Kucherov, Stamkos, you got JT Miller, you got Tyler Johnson, Andre Palat. They've got a lot of deep players too. Both teams are very deep. If you look at their decors, you could probably argue that Tampa's might be a little bit stronger. The Tampa decor reminds you a lot of the old New York Rangers decor, but I mean, they've got Victor Hedman, Ryan McDonough, Dan Girardi, they've got Anton Strawman, Mikhail Sergachev. On paper, it would appear the Tampa Bay Lightning have probably a stronger decor than the Bruins. They certainly have a lot of experience back there, but the Bruins do as well. I mean, obviously, their decor performed quite well against the Leafs. Certainly no complaints, but you probably give a slight edge to Tampa based on all that experience back there. But at the same time, the Bruins have won the Stanley Cup more recently than Tampa. A lot of these guys on the Bruins, you just have a hard time counting them out. I mean, Chara and Bergeron are tremendous leaders on that team, and Brad Marchand seems to come up big when it matters most as well. So it's going to be a tough, hard-fought series. And in this series, personally for me, I'm picking the Bruins, and I'm picking them in 7 games. I think it's going to be very tightly contested. You know, it's going to be close games. I wouldn't be surprised to see at least a handful here go into overtime. I'm picking the Bruins. I think they've dominated Tampa this year. I think they know how to play against the Lightning team. I think the top line of Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand, I think they can neutralize Tampa's top line. Kind of like what they did in Toronto. They basically took Austin Matthews off the score sheet, and I think they can pull this one off and defeat the Lightning in 7 games. Now, if we take a look at Pittsburgh versus Washington, for the 3rd consecutive year, they meet as a second-round opponent. Another tidbit for you, in case you weren't aware, is the Pittsburgh Penguins. Obviously, they defeated the Capitals in the second round now on 3 separate occasions in recent history. If you look back to 2009, they defeated the Capitals. They won the Stanley Cup. 2016, they defeated the Capitals second round. They won the Stanley Cup. 2017, they defeat the Capitals in the second round. They won the Stanley Cup. That's 3 consecutive times and all cup victories. They say things come in threes, so maybe this is a year for change. Will the Capitals be able to pull off a victory this year against the Pittsburgh Penguins and seem to end this curse? Can Ovechkin finally beat Crosby in a head-to-head matchup, and can they move forward? Now, one thing of concern for Pittsburgh is they're going to be starting the series without superstar Evgeny Malkin and Carl Hagelin. They are going to be out for at least 1 game. Hagelin's probably going to be out longer. He didn't even travel with the club to Washington. I mean, it's not that far of a commute. He could possibly join if things get better, but it's not looking good. He may be back later in the series. They felt at least optimistic that it's possible Malkin could go in Game 2. So he is with the club, and he's a possibility for Game 2 at this point, but he has an ankle injury he's battling. So it's hard to say. They can be tedious sometimes and take longer than expected to heal. Now, I suppose most people are probably going to say, well, let's look. It's Pittsburgh and Washington in the second round. This is easy. We're going with Pittsburgh because that's what always happens. And you know what? It's really hard to argue that point because really it's happened so many times, it's hard to bet against that. But like I said, when we did our NHL Bracket Challenge video, I said, you know what? As much as it's hard to bet against the Penguins, they're the 2-time Stanley Cup champions. They've defeated the Capitals in the playoffs numerous times. When I did my bracket, I had both Pittsburgh and Washington winning their first round series, meeting up yet again, and I did pick the Capitals to win this series, mainly because I think at some point in time, the Capitals need to get this done. You know, they've had tremendous goaltending here out of Braden Holtby. Obviously, in the last series against Columbus, Philip Grubauer started the series. Holtby ended up taking back the net, won 4 straight games. They're on a roll. The Capitals are actually playing some really good hockey here. They started the playoffs on a bad note, losing their first 2 games, both in overtime. I mean, obviously, they started on a bad note with the losses, but really, they weren't playing badly. They were really closely, tightly contested games with the luck going the other way to the other team in overtime. But once they made the switch in goal, they kind of seemed to gain their confidence back, and the Capitals have been on a roll, winning 4 straight to knock the Columbus Blue Jackets out. Now, even though that happened and they won the series 4-2, they could have easily won 4-1 or 4-0, in my opinion. Those other 2 games they lost were really close, and it's not like Columbus really dominated them at all. So at the end of the day here, I think the Capitals do stand a chance to break the curse. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if I come back later and find out that I was completely wrong, just because it's, like I said, it's Pittsburgh and Washington, so it's an easy choice, right? Everybody's probably saying, oh, Pittsburgh in 5, Pittsburgh in 6, Pittsburgh in 7. And you know what? It's hard to argue that point. We've seen it so many times. You know the ending to this movie already. But you know what? I'd really like to see something different, just to change things up. I'm sure Pens fans don't want to hear this, and I don't blame you. But you know what? And I won't be shocked here if I'm wrong, because the Capitals have let down people so many times in the playoffs. They never seem to get it done. So I'm probably going to be wrong on this, but I am picking the Capitals to win this. And I'm going to say it's in 7 games as well. I think that both series here in the East are going to be really close, really tightly contested, and they're both going to go the distance here to see a victory. And for once and final time, we're going to see Ovechkin finally get the victory here over Crosby, move on to the Eastern Conference Finals. And if my predictions hold true, we're going to have a Capitals versus Bruins Eastern Conference Final. So those are my thoughts. Maybe I'm crazy. I'm probably going to be wrong picking Washington, because it's happened every other time. But when I made my bracket challenge back before the playoffs started, that's what I went with. And I feel like I need to stick with that, even though my gut says you're probably wrong and Pittsburgh's probably going to get it done yet again. But I think just for the fact that I'd like to see a new narrative in the playoffs, be nice to see something different. But leave your comments down below. What are your predictions? Who do you have winning these two series? And how many games do you think it's going to take for each of them to get it done? If you missed our video doing our Western Conference preview and predictions, there'll be a link down below in the description as well as on the end screen. You can check that video out where we previewed and predicted who we thought would win with the Sharks and the Golden Knights, as well as the Predators and the Winnipeg Jets. So check that out if you haven't done so already. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams. There's plenty of content here for all fan bases to enjoy. And if you haven't done so already, consider following us on Twitter. You're going to see our Twitter handle on the screen right now, and it's linked down below in the description. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.